And we are live with Andrew Pillow, an educator based in Indianapolis, somebody that I've known for some time. Andrew is also a writer with Indy K-12. It's a local blog, education blog, powered by Brightbeam, my organization. Really excited about that and happy. Andrew, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate you, man.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So here's the deal. Andrew is an opinionated brother. And I say that in the best form of things, meaning he has good takes on things, good opinions, not bad opinions. Has been a classroom teacher, is currently serving in the military. He himself actually has an educational journey and history that brought him some perspective to teaching and to education. He grew up in the integrated schools of Kentucky, understood what it was to get a quality education, went to college and understood what it was like for other people who didn't necessarily get a quality education when they got there. Andrew is one of those young, sharp brothers who understands this education issue from many different angles. Love to have you on to talk right now, Andrew, because as you know, and we all know, we're in quarantine. We're getting that quarantine look. You're not. You still look sharp, probably because you're in the military. I do not. But through this era, you can see that things are changing for parents, for students, for schools, school systems. We're having to negotiate what we call this new normal, which is kind of a weird phrase for me in this because I don't want it to be the new normal. In that, charter schools are not necessarily always part of the mainstream conversation about what we do for public education and to support public education students. So I want to talk about that today. Number one, supporting charter school students through this rough time. But I want to start with the financial part.
Yes.
Financially, it's at issue right now whether or not charter schools should participate in the aid that is meant to support nonprofits for one and public education on another hand. What's your thinking of this? As someone who has taught in charter schools, worked directly with charter school parents and students, what's your thinking right now around the level of financial support that we should be supporting politically?
Well, I think it should be equal, and in some cases, maybe even greater than the amount that we're supporting traditional public schools. I think the main debate that you see going on is the same debate that you have anytime charter schools come up, which is that certain people just don't feel like they should get the same thing. And, that's just not going to work. So I can only speak from my personal experience as an educator. But when COVID-19 happened, people at my school were displaced. Okay. We had to reevaluate teaching methods. We had to supply kids with computers and in many cases, actually internet to access the curriculum. Like these things cost money. And as much as I would like to say this wasn't the case, all of these places we bought things from did not charge us because we were a charter school. They charged us the same money that they charge all the traditional public schools. And I can tell you as somebody who's on the ground that as a student or a parent, there is really no difference to them what kind of school we are. So there really shouldn't be a difference in the way that the funding comes to us. But as we all know that there is a difference in the way that the funding comes to us. And that's kind of what people are upset about is basically why are charter schools getting access to this money via the CARES Act or things like this. And it's just not fair. And it doesn't make any logical sense because we had the same expenses.
This expenses feel different in some ways, just in that school districts carry different. So first of all, let me just say this. When we talk broadly about charter schools, there's no such thing as a charter school in reality. There's a chartering process that gives you all different kinds of schools that have all different kinds of situations going on. And from state to state, that's really different because in some states, the charters are from the local school board and they're part of local school systems, the entire state of Florida and California, for instance. In some states, like my state, you have a lot of mom and pop shops that are not part of the local school board. And to keep their lights on is really tough. They're struggling little tiny nonprofits, single site charter schools. So I just want to clarify that for people listening. When we say charters, sometimes it hurts students and parents in these schools if you treat them all like they're the same.
And that's absolutely right. I mean, so if you look at like Indiana is a pretty pro school choice state, right? Which I'm lucky for that. I benefit from that. So our school is a IPS school. We're an Indianapolis public school, right? Now we have the autonomy to do things differently because that's the charter, that's the doctrine. But again, we are in a relationship that for all intents and purposes makes us the same as all the other schools. Now, there are schools that don't have that relationship and they kind of are in the same boat that you were just talking about. They're single site. They technically qualify as a school district, by some of the way the definitions, define those things, but they're really just a school that somebody decided to open in they're nonprofits. And that's one of the things that makes this argument so silly is because depending on where you fall in that spectrum of what kind of charter school you can be, greatly determines how much money that you might need to operate from one week to another. So for example, one of the relationships that my school benefits from with IPS is that there's some sizable transportation advantages that we get. Now, every other school doesn't have that relationship that qualifies as a charter school, they're coming out of pocket with that. Now, depending on what state you're in, you might have access to property taxes, but you probably don't. And you might not even have access to referendum money to raise money for those funds. So not only are they underfunded on the front end, right? But now you're trying to underfund them on the back end after this pandemic when the expenses they had were just the same. But the way that the argument is being broadcast in, the educational blogosphere, as if, they're stealing money on the front end, they're stealing money on the back end, when the reality is that the opposite is true on both ends.
I mean, that's really that's a sharp analysis in that there is a sense that charter schools are stealing something. They're getting too much. They're getting more than their fair share of something. And it's a really clever narrative to start if you're part of the mainstream system, because I mean, the bottom line is what you just said is the reality. You get less on the front end because districts can levy for things that charter schools can't. In the Twin Cities, for instance, the city of Minneapolis, the district can tax on the basis of every child in Minneapolis, whether they are in a district school or not. So the district actually levies money on every head count of every single child, even if they're not educating that child. That's what the school district, right. And when you leave and go back and forth between charter schools and whatnot, that money stays with the district no matter what. The charter schools are already at a disadvantage, which you just said on the front end. Feels like the effort is to kill them on both ends. Like the effort is to basically say, you get no soup, period, And it's not founded in any kind of logic. I think if you ask most people outside of the context of the debate, right? If you go up to a person who, say you're doing a jury selection and you're looking for people who aren't already influenced by the people they're normally influenced by, and you say, hey, should a school get money for a kid that doesn't go to that school? Most of them are going to say no. That just makes sense. Right.
And for whatever reason, it's kind of been morphed and contorted into the argument of education that you should get money for a kid that doesn't go to your school. Moreover, the school that they actually go to shouldn't get the money.
That's a clever argument. You have to admit that's some Machiavellian stuff. I'm
impressed. that people were able to do that. I mean, it's really quite clever. And moreover, for whatever reason, if let's say that kid leaves your school, a traditional public school, and goes to another public school, let's use the example, white flight, right? They move out of an inner city school, they move to some suburb and they go to that school. Well, that school is going to get the money, right? If they move out of district, and that makes up the vast majority of the losses of, students that the inner city districts that are losing, they're hemorrhaging kids to the suburbs. That hasn't changed. And now that charter schools have come in there, all of a sudden, We need the rules to be different. And it just doesn't make any sense. And then you throw the pandemic on top of this, and it makes even less sense, because what you've seen now is that they've actually changed their logic. So one of the most common arguments against charter schools is that somehow we're not really schools, we're businesses, we're this, we're that. Okay. Well, one of the arguments against the funding is that charter schools are double dipping in the funding. So we're getting the money that's meant for schools, and then we're also applying for a paycheck protection program, which most of them haven't, right? But basically small business loans, and people are crying foul about that. But I'm like, yo, that's what you've been saying that they were for decades now, right? And you're not giving them the other money that other schools are entitled to. So even if they were applying for those small business loans, that should go with your logic. That's what you said they should be doing. Mm-hmm. But now, because that money's actually available widespread, at forgivable loans or very low interest loans, people are upset about that because regular schools don't have access to those loans, and they're hating.
The hating is like the best word I can think of for it. The double dipping thing is a powerful narrative also right now. And I think it's important, if it's true, it's important to treat all of these claims like they're honest and they're true in the beginning, and to say to yourself, am I being honest about this? So the double dipping thing, the claim, I think, comes from the idea of, hey, charter schools, you guys say that you're public schools. So how can you actually apply for a pot of money that is supposed to help private businesses, small businesses stay afloat if you're actually public entities? And it's an important conversation that opens up what I think is the problem that we have writ large, which is it's a nuance, and these discussions aren't good with nuance. It's like there's a, like, if we wanted to have a college class on this, we would have the discussion differently than we're having it right now, right? Like, oh my God, you're supposed to be public, but how can you tap into money for private businesses? What would you say about that? Like, so you have charter schools in some places that tap into this money that's meant to keep private businesses. Actually, it's meant for private businesses and nonprofits.
Correct.
Yeah, so it is a weird middle ground, but it's definitely not like your district, like IPS can't apply for that money, right?
Yeah. So and to me, the issue is like, why is it a gotcha? Okay. So let me ask you a question. If I walk into any traditional public school district and I throw a large sum of corporate money at them, right? Are they not going to take it? Like, I don't think that where the money comes from should be a big deal, right? As long as it's not being funded by some cartel or something like that, especially considering the fact that you're not giving them the money on the front end. Now, here's what I'll say. I understand why some people think that that's not fair. Like, I logically see how people can see, oh, well, charter schools are doing this thing that other schools can't do. And that's not fair, especially since this money wasn't explicitly meant for them to have it. I would take issue with meant. Okay. If it's legal for them to get it, then it was meant for them to, as far as I'm concerned, it's meant for them to get it. If it didn't explicitly ban them from getting it, then we're allowed to get it. And schools come up with those kind of resources all the time. I mean, I live in a state where pre-K was partially funded, or in some cases wholly funded, by a private or a publicly traded company. I mean, that's just something that schools do. I mean, we've always taken money wherever we can get it. And I think that any school would do that if they had a chance. I mean, if there was money that traditional public schools could access, that charter schools couldn't access, would we be saying, oh, look at that, you did it, you can't do that, that's not fair? No, because that's what they do all the time, right? That's just par for the course in the educational landscape that we live in. So even if it is true, and like you said, let's operate under the assumption that it is, okay, I don't see what would be wrong with that. I don't see what would be wrong in this narrow confine where charter schools are advantaged by the number of funds that they're allowed to apply for. I don't see what would be wrong with that, especially considering the fact that they're not eligible for so many other funds. It stands to reason that they should be eligible for those, because this is a business, small business, nonprofit protection program, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you need protection because there's nobody that's going to come bail them out, right? If they can't make payroll. I've seen charter schools not be able to make payroll a number of times.
Well, and this is that's to me, I think the most important point, Andrew, is the idea that call things what they actually are. This is a paycheck program. It's a program that's meant to protect not schools or charters or nonprofit or business, because then it would be called the charter school or the nonprofit business plan. It's actually to protect workers, American workers' paycheck. There are going to be mass numbers of people without this type of aid. We all have a vested interest, regardless of where a family works, for them not to go broke right now. Correct. And not, to face economic insecurity. Now, you may not like what a charter school staff member, a janitor, a teacher, a principal, a dean, whatever. You may not like what they do for a living. But in a time of crisis where economic insecurity for families is going to be a problem, a plan to save paychecks wherever they are situated should not be something we should be arguing about. Yeah, it's like a weird application of this, anti-reform argument. It's a weird place to take it. Like, we should save American workers and paychecks, except for those people who work in an industry or in a nonprofit or a business or whatever that we don't like. That would be like me saying, you know what? I'm not a big fan of Target. Because they import too much garbage, they overpackage everything. So I don't want Target workers to get any type of relief right now from my taxes. That would be the pettiest, weirdest argument ever. I mean, am I seeing that the wrong way?
No, that's accurate. I don't think that there was any hyperbole in what you just said. I mean, and it makes sense on so many levels that they would get this, right? We know that, in general, charter schools operate at a greater risk than traditional public schools.
Financially.
Not just a risk financially, which is the most obvious one, and even academically, because they're, charter schools aren't allowed to fail year over year like, traditional public schools are, right? So they operate at a big risk. So it stands to reason that in a climate like this, a pandemic, where risk is exacerbated and the government is attempting to mitigate that risk, they would be eligible for those programs. Traditional public schools are not operating at that same risk. They're not going to not meet payroll, right? So they're going to find the money to pay them what they're owed. They might end up laying some people off or rifting some people and things like that, but they're going to pay the people what they owe, because at the end of the day, they can raise taxes, they can have a referendum, they can do whatever they need to do, right? Now, if you're not in a relationship with a school district like my school is and things like that, you're not going to have that same luxury. So it makes sense that they would apply for the program, and I'm not mad if they do. Personally.
No, it seems to me like whether I was for charters or not, I actually am not putting any other industry under scrutiny right now, any other nonprofit sector, business sector, whatever, under scrutiny, because I am focused on the worker, the family, economic security, and those things. So all the petty kind of political posturing that comes out of this or whatnot, I think it says more about the people that are raising this as an issue. They truly are kind of, I think, really disgusting, petty political people. And in the environment that Trump has unleashed on the United States, it's a good time to be that petty and political about every little single thing. The part to me that pisses me off about it and gets me really kind of angry and ready to hurt somebody is the fact that these are children in these schools. Like the idea that you would want a school to suffer, or you would want these buildings to suffer, or these staff to suffer because you don't like a school being chartered outside of the cartel, the education blob, the unions, the elected leaders who get paid by the unions and all that whole industry of educational kind of largesse. That's just, to me, so petty, because at the end of the day, if you're willing to hurt children, their parents, their families, and workers because you don't like the fact that there are non-unionized independent public schools in the United States, then have at her. You're disgusting. You're a disgusting human being, but whatever. Back to treating these things as if people will make claims that we should pay attention to and we should consider to be honest. Sheila, what's your name? So Sheila Lowry Loftus has two comments here that I think are important to take a look at. The first one is really one that is not uncommon. You'll hear this: fix the public schools. Taxpayer money for public schools should not go to charter schools. Charters refuse to take some students. So that's not an uncommon thing to bring up in this situation and say about this situation. How would you answer that? Once again, fix the public schools first. The taxpayer money should not be for charter schools. That, the additional claim is that they are selective.
So the great thing about the school choice argument is that one bad charter school doesn't hurt my argument, because it's about the idea that families have choice. There are schools that I've seen that do things that I think aren't necessarily up to code, kosher, however you want to frame it. I've seen schools that kick out, kids for minor things and things like that. I've also seen public schools that do that too, but they can do it because they're a traditional public school and there's really nothing anybody can do about it. So I do think that there are some schools that people absolutely shouldn't send their kids to. And if they don't send their kids to them, then guess what? Those schools will close because their main source of income is head count money, right? Now, here's what I would say to that. One of those schools doesn't have any bearing on the argument that choice should exist. But one bad traditional public school that does the same things as the school that you're talking about does make the argument for school choice, because kids are in many cases forced to go to it. So I think that argument against an individual school is actually valid. Every charter school option, every school choice option is not a good one, right? That is not what any of us are saying. And if you find a school like that, you should absolutely call them out. I mean, I call them out from time to time around here, but that is really kind of tangent to the entire argument as a whole.
Additionally to Sheila's comment, she also says anyone who knows how funding, I think she means to say works, knows the biggest cost goes to building and staff. To divide the per student amount is not realistic. If I pay taxes for a fire department, can I refuse their help and get a tax credit instead? This is a unique argument. I don't think I've ever heard it really honestly put that way. So fire department meant for everybody. We all pay into the money for fire department. I don't like the way they put out fires. I call them, they don't show up on time.
Yeah. I mean, she is right.
Should I be able to get like a tax credit so I can hire a couple of dudes down the street to come to my house with water buckets instead if I need it?
Well, a lot of that money does go to infrastructure. And I agree that we spend too much money on that, which is why some of these buildings need to close. It would be a lot easier to fund a lot of these schools. I mean, you have schools that were built in the 80s or 70s for 2,000 kids that got 300 kids in there. Okay, that is not my individual charter school's fault that the school district can't budget appropriately and act and close a building that is 70% vacant and move to a smaller location or sell the building where it is more fiscally responsible. Okay, that is not the fault of school choice, that school districts don't do that. And I know why school districts don't do that, because the second you try and close a school, you'll get people who graduated in 1980 saying, I went to school here and we had this program and that program. And there's a lot of emotions attached to the school in the community. So it makes it hard to make those decisions like Sheila was talking about that are actually what's best for kids. Sometimes you need to close those buildings. Sometimes you need to evaluate how much your infrastructure costs are. I mean, if you look at school districts around the country and look at the stuff they're paying for, it's clear where a lot of the waste is going. And it's not because for kids that aren't actually attending those schools. It's because they're spending money on things like infrastructure or things they could easily outsource, like painting. A lot of schools have painters. A lot of schools just have painters on staff, right? And it's good if you need to paint something, but I guarantee I could find somebody cheaper to do it somewhere else. So,
well, I'll tell you this much. I've made jokes about this before, but in Minneapolis, we had 16 bargaining units in the district, and one of them was one guy. I'll never get over this. I say it all the time because, like, I remember the day that I found that out. I kind of like spent the entire day tripping on the fact, like, wait a second, one dude has an entire bargaining unit to himself. Now, it used to be he was the dude who fixed the string instruments. There used to be an entire group that used to fix all of the string instruments, and one by one they retired, so it left one guy, and we couldn't get rid of the bargaining unit. And even though we were moving to, like, the strings was going to be outsourced because it wasn't something we could afford internally anymore. Yeah, this dude had a job as a bargaining unit. Again, how we set up schools, not on behalf of children, but on the behalf of adults. Andrew, the selectivity one about charter schools gets on my nerves, to be very honest with you, because I get when people are honestly believing that it's true, but I think many people who say it know that regular traditional district schools are very selective in who gets into what school in there. The very clearest way that happens first is, listen, it's not an accident that you will have entire metro areas where one school is full of 99%, 95% kids of color who are poor, and a mile or 2 miles down the road, there's a school that has the inverse demographic population. That's not an accident. That's a man-made lake. That's exactly what that is. And that is not one section of one place. That's United States. That's education writ large. There's a map. Look at the map, and it'll be real weird to you how all the supposedly bright kids end up in this one program in one part of one building, and then all these other kids will end up in another part. Where it's almost as if there's some sort of weird enrollment voodoo that takes place that people don't want to talk about. But then when it comes to charters, they're so selective. They're not taking certain students. There's not a single argument that you can make about that you can't make about magnet schools, but I don't hear anybody ever take magnet schools on for their selectivity. As a matter of fact, magnet schools, their selection and enrollment situation nationally is so bad that nobody should ever make the argument against charter schools until they shouldn't be taken seriously until they take that on first and fix it there first,
I mean, they're inherently selective. I mean, that is
super selective.
That is in many cases their purpose. And you're right, because here's the thing that people don't realize about traditional school districts is that school choice always existed for people who had needs, right? Mm-hmm. So people who could band together in this one neighborhood, right? And they can make, they could draw their own lines for their individual school. I mean, I've seen school districts where the radius are not school districts, like schools where the radius they draw from is like 1 or 2 miles, and it's all in an affluent neighborhood, right? So you'll look at a school district, like an inner city school district, and like, what is this school? Oh, well, that's the school that serves those, 5 square blocks of, mansions and upscale condos. And that's like a real thing. To me, that is the worst form of school choice. That's people who knew how to play the game, people who knew what to do, people who knew what meetings to attend, and were able to draw the boundaries of their publicly funded school to go to school, to have their kids go to school with their, rich friends' kids. And that happens all the time, and nobody really ever talks about it.
It's a normal part of public education. It's like we take it for granted that that's just a normal part of public education. The house buying scenario. I don't know anybody, honestly, above a certain level of means, meaning that you have a certain level of income, and their level of income isn't very high. When you start purchasing homes, that they don't pay attention to what's going to happen with their kids when they buy that home. Mm-hmm. Right. And as their means go up, their school decisions change just level by level, dollar by dollar. You make $70,000 a year and you're buying a home. You got one level of decisions to make. You pump that up to $90K and you got another decision. You start getting into the 110, 150, range or whatnot. It's just like magic that your schools start changing, right? Anyways, I think what's that?
We just bought a house like last year, and the school.
And you didn't think about schools at all when you were buying your house, right?
Not as a teacher.
No. You just decided, you were like, listen, I live in the city. I'm going to go to the worst performing school closest to me, wherever it is, just because I want to give back to public education. That's what you thought, right?
Not only did we think about schools, but it was like I might not even send the kid to the school that's down the street from me, just because we might want to go. Maybe we want them to go to the school where I work at. Probably not, because that's going to get annoying. But maybe down the line, I want them to go to school closer to where me and the wife work. However, I do know that other people care about school districts. And when I bought this house, I would bought it in a good school district because I wanted the resale value to be up just in case we ever, move. So school districts are, as a matter of fact, when we bought this house, the first printout they gave us was a rating of the school district.
Really?
It was the very first thing. It was actually how they advertised the houses.
Wow. I mean, I thought they had stopped doing it. Maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, I can't remember how long ago it was, there was this big deal by the National Realtors Association where they put out something saying that they were no longer going to steer families, based on things like that. They made some big declaration that I'll have to dig it up to take a look at it. But so they gave you something right up front saying this is what the schools look like.
I remember the thing you're talking about. But what that doesn't account for is new build houses, right? Mm-hmm. So these people build, like these builders, like the big builders and things like that, they can still just advertise school districts if they want, and they do. And of course, that's where they pop up. They pop up in these, places that might have been semi-rural, like, a decade ago, but now they're bustling suburban communities with, rising schools, and they certainly advertise that. Mm-hmm. Now, a realtor might not. And of course, if I ask them the demographics of the area, they won't tell me that because that's like illegal. But they certainly advertise the schools. Like, it was like I said, it was the first thing I think. I'd have the packet somewhere around here. As a matter of fact, it's somewhere around here, but I swear it was the very first thing they told me.
That is so, it's so interesting in how that's a normal part of life. And still people will make the argument as if that doesn't exist, that public education is really a fair equalizer. And it's open to everybody, everybody, come one, come all type of thing. I don't know what it is that people usually say. They have to take all comers, I think, is the thing that people say, which we all know is a joke. I want to share my screen right here and just show, we started this with discussing the relief that charter schools are trying to tap into financial, because in a time like this, charter schools, just like anybody else, need to keep the lights on, keep their people paid. Charter school students need to be remembered in the public imagination about what we should be defending and protecting. This is just basically telling us that between March 6th and March 27th, Congress passed what was intended to be legislation to keep things afloat for individuals, businesses, nonprofits, help systems, health and help systems, just in general. Part of that aid was meant for supporting families during this time, supporting businesses, nonprofits, especially small businesses, hospitals, and basically this one that you see here, the Paycheck Protection Program. My nonprofit got that. We got a loan, which is basically offered to nonprofits. We run a nonprofit. Brightbeam is a nonprofit of which I will tell everyone, a very talented team, highly effective education nonprofit that pays people, and we are an employer. And during this time, to make sure that we stay stable and solid, we applied for and got the loan. And, I want to emphasize this word loan. And the purpose of this was to not be laying people off during a tough time, not have people that have to go on to government assistance or have to scramble and find ways to survive during a tough time. The idea that you wouldn't like us or politics or whatever, when you look at this is the purpose, this is an American package. This is a package of your government is saying, we are making sure that we're going to keep all boats floating. And I'm looking at this on a charter, organization's website to tell charter people about this and let charter folks know what it's about. But it shouldn't be about their charter part, right? We should all, in some ways, we should all be in this together. Do you have anything to say, you think, about my earlier point about how kind of just unnerving it is that people would make this a political moment? Like people who or an ed wars would make this a political moment?
Everything has got to be a partisan issue, because if it's not, then people actually have to dive in deep to what things mean. And when you do that, it really doesn't support the anti school choice argument. The simplest way to do it is to make it a partisan issue. And I don't believe it's an accident that they've misframed what these loans are, what these programs are. I don't think it's an accident that they framed charter schools and school choice the way they framed it for the better part of a decade either. I mean, I think all of that is intentional, and I think the people know what they're doing. They're trying to make it a partisan issue, and it's not. Neither is actually a partisan issue. And I'm lucky enough to live in a state where, these things are kind of more or less apolitical. But in a lot of places where that's not the case, and this is still like a huge battleground, which is most places, like, mind you, this is what you're going to see. And for the most part, people don't know any better. I mean, like, it's only the people like you and me who actually are going to go in and look at this stuff and see what it is and see what it's doing, who are actually going to attempt to evaluate any of the claims that you see. And because of that, it makes it easy to make these arguments. I have been told countless times by people who I know don't know any better, that selectivity argument against charter schools. Now, I've worked at a charter school like my entire time that I've been teaching, right? We've never turned down a kid for anything, and especially when I was a younger teacher, there are times I wish we did. I was like, man, I really wish you would go somewhere else, but we don't. He comes to our school. There have been various times where I think we've had problematic discipline policies, but that's true of any school. But the idea that we're, like some type of secret private school just doesn't hold any weight anywhere. But it's a very common opinion that people have. And it's a common opinion people have because people told them to have that opinion, and nobody actually evaluates it. If I get told all the time that charter schools are stealing money, and when you explain what they actually mean when they say you're stealing money, nobody actually believes that's stealing. Like, if I go to a restaurant, right, and eat, the restaurant I ate at should get the money for the meal that I ate, not another restaurant that feels like I should eat there. Like, I think everybody understands that, like, imagine if there's a McDonald's next to your house and you eat McDonald's a lot, but today I want Burger King. So you go to Burger King, and then McDonald's feels like, hold on, Burger King, you're stealing like the money from us. Not like you're stealing customers, like you're literally stealing the money that he spent on your food at your restaurant. That money should go to us because we've grown accustomed to him eating with us. So why should you ever get that money, even if his choice changed? That's pretty much the argument. And it's been misframed that way because the other way doesn't make sense. No one would buy that argument. And we have concrete.
Well, Americans do like to have options in, listen, just, the tender age of being able to swipe left or right quickly on something so as important as who you might love. The ability to choose what you're going to eat tonight, whether you want to have Mexican, Chinese, or, pizza, or just, garbage, whatever you want to eat, like Americans are about like personalizing everything in the world. So I do believe this argument about schools is going to eventually die with the next wave and the wave after of parents who are so used to personalizing life in so many ways. Do I want Spotify this week, or do I want to go back to Apple Music? Which one's better? Do I want Tidal? Well, what are the benefits of Tidal over Spotify, right? When you have that as part of a psychology of an entire consumer group for enough time, like, I am not a prophet, but I'm thinking to myself, eventually this archaic idea that we all must go through the same education door for a new wave of parents is going to become more and more absurd at some point. All the way down to the level what you just said, McDonald's and Burger King. Like, I'm not going to go to McDonald's today, but the workers there are upset with me because I made a different choice. So they want me to send some of my money back to them and increase my bill. What's that?
Even at a higher level than, like, like we're starting to see in like the sports arena, more, you know, African American athletes are choosing to attend HBCUs. People, fans of those the programs they usually go to, feel literally wronged. Like, how do you feel entitled to a decision that was never yours to make? You know, so anytime you start introducing choice to an equation, like a certain amount of people are going to be upset. But if you framed it the right way, like the argument is over. And we know this concretely. I mean, there are places that do studies, do surveys and things like that. And one of the interesting ones that I saw, and I think I published it on the site a while ago, probably a couple of years ago, which is the way that you ask the questions. You can actually break down the way that they ask the questions. So they asked one, it was like, what do you think about charter schools? Well, obviously, it skewed more to the direction that we're seeing, like it was more controversial, right? Then they asked, what do you think about students being able to use the money they use at any school at another school that they choose to attend? Well, then all of a sudden, everybody's opinion completely changed, which was it was the same argument before. You just asked, instead of asking what was school choice or what was charter schools, you just gave them the actual definition. And that's what really it comes down to. What is this actually saying? Like, get out of the brand names of your debate and out of your argument. Get down into what the actual product is. What are we actually?
Well, and you know, the opposition has actually sullied the brand, which is why what you're saying right now, it resonates with me, is because they've actually branded a charter school as a thing, first of all, and that's given the public the idea that charter schools are a thing, like one thing. And it's mostly characterized by negative things. Like, they're supposed to be test prep mills, basically a drill and kill mill with lots of discipline and no windows, and, you know, police officers for teachers, and no counselors, no food. Actually, they're like made to eat porridge, you know, once a morning and then nothing else for the rest of the day. And then they're pretty much made to be robots for the entire day, which, as somebody who's visited hundreds of schools, I think it's pretty masterful to make the public that dumb to believe anything just that outrageously dumb.
Yes. And that's what their schools are. Like, I'm not going to say that every traditional public school.
It's so true. It's so Trumpian. It's like accusing others of what you're doing. Yeah.
But like, they have way more rules and regulations that they have to abide by, right? Like, there's only so many ways that you can be a traditional public school because they have all of these things that the district mandates. Charter schools, like, which can be any, like, you know, they can have anything in their charter, right, that, you know, that they think can help advance children. They're way more different. They're way more diverse. I've been to schools, you know, good and bad. You know, I've been, like, let's just talk about race here, right? Because, you know, a lot of pro-Black organizations are against charter schools. The most pro-Black schools I've ever been in are charter schools, you know, bar none. I've been to schools where the assemblies and things that they do, they could not possibly do those things at a traditional public school.
Okay, let's just stop here for a second, because this is a super important point. There are people who watch this show in the morning that agree with charter schools, and there are those who disagree. And many of those who disagree think that they're doing so, or say that they're doing so. I don't want to, like, disparage why they're doing it, but in their own words, I believe they have an Afrocentric idea for why they oppose charter schools in general. So what you just said doesn't register, like, for many. What I like to make clear about the fact is, I don't believe there's such a thing as a charter school. So when you're trying to attach my support for the chartering process of schools to some other negative vision of a thing that you're thinking of, that's not what I'm advocating for. And I feel the need to be clear and specific about that. You just mentioned Afrocentric charter schools where there are things that go on that would never go on in the district or whatnot. I highly support those. It's like, it's the reason why I support chartering of schools, is because I want more of my people to go out and get a charter, like a driver's license, and actually start driving their own educational process, their own schools. Now I'm going to say something that I think is going to piss some people off who are in that camp. You also mentioned HBCUs earlier. HBCUs are either public or private. You have the UNCF schools, and you have the Thurgood Marshall schools. The Thurgood Marshall schools are public. The UNCF schools are private. The biggest names in Black education that you know are in that group of schools that you call private. They get a charter from the state to be a higher learning institution, and then they run mostly Black education services, right? That is a charter school. It's a chartered school that is mostly Black, that is a major seat of Black education or whatnot. And the idea that you couldn't have that in 12th grade or 11th grade or any of the grades below higher education is madness. It's like some anti-Black, weird Afrocentricizing of a very white idea, because of course you can have schools. You're calling them segregated, maybe. You're calling them, not part of the bigger democratic whatever, but there is a need for HBCUs. And the idea that you could have K-12 HBCUs, an extension of what we know that goes real. But look what you also said earlier. What really goes down with HBCUs, the idea that you couldn't have that through K-12 is weird to me. But what you said about sports earlier, to me, like, made my antennas go up, because the idea that you would now have athletes who would start saying they're going to switch to HBCUs opens up this conversation about how much property they have been to those other schools for years. Those people's, the response of PWI is about them making that type of decision is almost like, we own you though. We own the entire sports system. How could you make a decision like that? How could you leave us? You're our capital. The Black body and talent is our capital. How could you be taking your capital away from us? Exact same thing in K-12 education.
So it's funny you said that. So, and I've got to be careful here because of like who I am, that I don't get like too partisan on this, like for obvious reasons. But a couple of years ago, there was, someone who said something along the lines of HBCUs a school choice. Well, back when they were started, like the people in those districts.
Oh, I wonder who that is. Keep going, Andrew.
Back when that started, when I was in those districts, like it wasn't a choice, right? Because, land grants in some states chose to educate the Black students at the, their regular schools. And in some states are like, nah, we'll let y'all go to school, but y'all not going to school with us, right? So then that wasn't choice. But then the part that comes after that, which is what you said, is that like now it does operate the same way that we see charter schools and things like that operate on a lower level. And the arguments that you see used are the ideas that you see portrayed when Black students go to HBCUs, right? And Black athletes specifically, as opposed to a PWI, is really pretty much the same thing that you see at a lower level. It's the idea that you are a money-making instrument, okay? Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. Nobody would have cared if I went to an HBCU because I'm not a superstar, 5-star recruit, right? So if I could have gone anywhere. Now, if I was a 5-star basketball recruit and I chose to go to Howard or Hampton or wherever that is, then all of a sudden somebody is losing money, right? And probably a school that had grown to feel entitled to me. And that's what you're seeing happen now. And I am a huge college sports fan. I went to one of those blue blood programs, okay? And I have grown accustomed to getting those 5-star athletes at my school. I'm just being honest. But I understand why you would need to break that system and why you would need to open up those things to more competition, because right now you're seeing coaches can be racist. Schools don't have to have any type of plan for diversity, anything like that. And for so long, we've treated that like that's their only option, and it's not. And all it would take is a couple deciding, you know what, I'm not going to deal with this system, to make those schools reform, which is the idea about opening up public schools to competition in the first place. They have no incentive to do anything differently if everybody has to go there, or if everybody just does go there, because it's important to people to use that choice too. And it is the same argument, not the same way that it was presented, controversially a couple of years ago, but today it is the same.
You know about this dude? You know this case here?
That's Mikey Williams. Yeah, I wrote about him on the site. So
tell me about this. Tell me how this applies to like what we're talking about right now in terms of education.
So in the fallout of the George Floyd protests, a lot of people, and this has been a thing that's been happening for a while. A lot of people were basically saying, wouldn't it be great if some of these superstar athletes actually went to HBCUs? Now, Mikey Williams, his mother, I believe, went to Hampton. So he was already exposed to the idea of HBCUs anyway. But he tweeted, going to an HBCU wouldn't be so bad. Then he further clarified, he's like, yes, when my recruitment starts up, and I think he's 15, so he's probably like a sophomore. When my recruitment starts up, there will be HBCUs on my list, and they're not going to be there just for show. So basically, he wants people to start considering them. Now, we were waiting to see, is this actually going to come to fruition? Because look, as pro-Black as I am, there are actual reasons people don't attend, an athlete doesn't attend to go to an HBCU. You're not going to play on TV too often. You're going to be on buses instead of the charter planes. You're not going to have the private chefs. You're not going to get all the best gear, right? So you're not going to play in front of thousands of people every night. So there are actual reasons why an NBA talent would want to go to a bigger school. Exposure, perks, training, things like that. But some people are saying, I'm going to forgo that. I'm not getting paid anyway. I might as well go somewhere where the money that's being made off me is going to, something that I believe in. So Mikey Williams hasn't committed yet, but there's another guy. He's Maker, and he's in this class, and he actually committed to go to Howard next year.
What's his name?
His name is Maker. His cousin's Thon Maker. He played up there in Milwaukee for a while in the NBA. There's a whole family of makers, and they're all 7-foot hoopers. But a lot of them play pro first, and he's actually going to go to Howard first. He's a 5-star recruit. He's the highest rated recruit that's gone to any of those schools. And I just wrote about him actually on Indie Ed. But he's the highest rated recruit that's gone to an HBCU since they started keeping track of these things. So it's a big deal. Now, people are upset about it, are not really upset about it, but they're saying, hey, this isn't in your best interests. And I think it's funny that they are trying to tell these kids that it's not in their best interest, because when you do that, you presume to know what their best interest is, which is the same argument that you see with, on the lower level. Well, who got to him and told him that he should do that? That's not going to help him get to the NBA. That's not going to help him do this. That's not going to, you don't know that. I think being a 6'11" star in a smaller conference where you're going to dominate, where you can average 30 might actually help you get to the NBA. I don't know, and I'm kind of an expert on college basketball. So
applying this to education, if I think about it though, what if someone said to any of these individuals, you choosing that HBCU is going to have an impact on the majority of students that are in PWIs? You're going to be actually damaging the most well-formed system that there is already by doing this. And also, by the way, by you going to HBCUs, which are private chartered schools, let me stick with that for a minute. By doing that, making that decision, you're taking money away from public systems and sending it to segregated private schools, private, educational entities.
It is wealth redistribution. So in any college sport, there are two sports that make money. You know what the two sports are.
Let me guess.
Basketball and football.
Chess and lacrosse. No,
right.
It's not those two? Okay,
no, I don't think so. It's basketball and football, right? Now, of the sports that colleges play, which are the ones that are most dominated by predominantly Black athletes? They're the same two.
Tennis and rowing.
Well,
no.
No. Yeah, it's basketball and football.
Right.
So your two money-making sports are predominantly African American, right? And here's the thing that most people don't realize: other sports do not make money. As a matter of fact, they lose money. They hemorrhage money. Okay. The other sports, by and large, are supported by basketball and football. Okay. So you have people playing these predominantly Black sports and redistributing that money to prop up these other sports. Now, listen, I'm somebody who controversially, okay, doesn't necessarily have a problem with the way the system is set up. I think college athletes should get paid, but I don't believe you can pay them all necessarily market value because most of them are not worth the value of their scholarships. So, you would have a lot of people who are like track stars and things like that who have gone to school on scholarship that wouldn't be able to do it if we turned this into a purely profit-driven situation. And I also think that, that might be true in football and basketball too. Like we frame this argument around the Anthony Davises and the things like that, the Zion Williamsons who are worth millions, but there are guys who aren't worth even room and board. So I don't necessarily have a problem with, people not getting filthy rich in college.
Okay, I think I know what you're saying, brother, but I do want to say that our Lord and Savior tells us that everybody has unsurpassable worth granted to them by our Lord and Savior. I just want to say that in case there's anybody listening saying, I can't believe Andrew's saying that some people aren't worth their room and board. I get what you're saying, though. From the business model perspective, you're saying from a free market perspective, they won't cover themselves financially with dollars by what they contribute to the programs, right? And some other players will have an outsized contribution, like they'll be bringing in most of the money. But and getting back again to thinking about this, like in terms of school, because these are schools that are going to be facing things. They literally are seeing your presence, your body, as being worth something like capital. So when you make the decision to withhold your body from one of them, you're not just like withholding your presence. They don't really care about your blackness being there. That's not it. You're withholding money, their capital, by moving your body somewhere else. And when I think about schools, because you're blowing my mind with some of this, I don't know as much about college sports, and you actually have said a lot about this. But when I think about it, magnet schools really are under pressure to keep a racial balance in their schools. So they have to find the black and the brown people who can actually pass certain tests or pass certain hoops. So they have to take the talent from regular district schools. They have to, because they need black and brown bodies in their schools that can pass the test. So they go harvesting.
They already pass the test.
They want to already pass the test because that's part of getting in. They have a selective process, and many of them, they have a selective process of some sort, either talent, perceived ability, test scores, grade point averages, you name it. The school that Chance the Rapper went to in Chicago looks at a kid's grades and their GPA and their background. And oh, by the way, that school actually suspended Chance the Rapper, and he wrote his first mixtape while on suspension, a 10-day suspension from that school, and never went back because it had so many downloads. But my point is magnet schools are going to look for the high performers, people of color, kids of color. And then charter schools are going to get many of the kids that can't pass that hump, but still want an alternative program, still want to get out of the system, but can't pass the test to get into magnet schools. That's who's going to end up in a lot of charter schools. And then the district is going to be the regular system. But in sports, we don't really have an analogous mid-tier, right? Like we have schools that are looking for the very talented. We don't have one that are looking like charter schools to support the ones who still want to get out of the main system, but don't want to, or who can't pass the big hurdles.
Correct. We don't.
Yeah. And that's where I think it starts breaking down, except for the fact that HBCUs have a wider doorway, like to get in. They have a wider doorway. Like they educate many people of color that traditional colleges would not admit, for one, or even if they do admit, would not provide the type of supportive services to them that they need to be successful in year 1, 2, 3, and 4. Anyways, well, this has been very helpful. I want to say this. We started talking in the beginning of this about whether or not we should support financially charter school students during a tough time like this in the same way that we support everybody else. And maybe in some ways, you said in the beginning, in some cases, we might even need to provide more support. I just want to point out that where this comes from is a report This story was not a story. This idea about who should get the money, the PPP money and all this government stuff, government money, was not a story until it was made a story by certain organizations. I'll give you like an example though. Here's a story from In the Public Interest, which is a union-funded group. Like many union-funded groups, there are thousands of these across the country, these groups, these nonprofits that get paid by unions to continuously produce issues and papers and research and frame discussions and messaging and whatnot. There's an entire funded apparatus specific just to making the public dumber about charter schools or antagonistic towards charter schools. In the Public Interest is one of these groups. I'm not going to mince words. There are going to be people from California who are Negroes and others who are going to try and jump in and defend them for this or that or other reason. These are the type of groups that work with the NAACP and others in that state to get charters continuously under the microscope for anything. So here's a story that they have about charter schools double dipping, supposedly. This is the framework. And you know, when you start seeing the same, yeah, you start seeing the same words over and over again, double dipping in the public coronavirus aid. This actually is a so-called report, came from a so-called report that they did. But Diane Ravitch's group, the Network for Public Education, also did the report. They also went up to Congress and made a thing out of it. They have an entire campaign around it. They're union-aligned or union-funded groups who want the public continuously to hear a message about how charter schools are doing something bad or wrong or evil or nefarious. They will make it about race. They will make it about money, just whatever, like just to keep the thing on blast with charters. They'll never interrogate their own schools. They'll never interrogate. You'll never see them put out a report that says, here are all the ways in which traditional public schools are failing. But the funny thing about this is I'm showing you right now a story from Oakland, and this exact same story has popped up across the country in other places. I can pull up one of these from Connecticut. I could pull up one of these from New York. Just the same story repackaged by some nonprofit locally that makes it look like it's just a local report being done by a local group. The only reason you and I are even talking about this issue right now within the frame that we're talking in it in is because there is an organized, funded national network of groups that will make the same thing the issue at the same time. They'll all join together to say, like radio stations, we're going to blast this message out, and we're going to have newspaper writers, journalists, reporters, everybody else pick it up. And then we're going to be in you and I are going to be in some Facebook group somewhere, Twitter, Reddit, somewhere, and someone is going to say something so incredibly stupid where the talking point we know 110% comes directly from these groups. Right. So I just want to say to my listeners and to everybody else, like, let's be real about issues when we talk about them, about where they come from and who's doing. You can call me all kinds of whatever you want to call me for supporting the idea that I should have a right to decide where my kid goes to school. And if my kid attends a charter school and I'm a tax-paying American, that you better believe we're going to have a fight if you try and make some sort of narrative that my kid doesn't deserve the same support that your kid deserves in your little Tony Magnet school or your little enclave residential school that you paid an extra $200,000 on your mortgage to get, or if you're a college professor, some school where you used your status and your connections or whatnot to get into that school, the lab school or whatever. I'm going to make fun of you because you're ridiculous on one end, and I know just like many people in government right now, you're gaslighting America. Your job is to gaslight us all, to make us think we're crazy for wanting options, to make us crazy and feel like we're selfish as adults if we want our kids to be in something alternative to your nasty, racist, endemically incompetent system of education in the United States. Anyways, that's my kind of commentary about all of this today. Andrew, what's your final word on all this? I love what you have to say about almost everything, to be very honest with you. You're one of the sharpest dudes. You got to give me faith in the next generation that things are going to be okay, because you don't think in one way. You don't think in like one direction. You're not the monolith. Like you're an enigma, bro.
I try not.
You really like something out of a Marvel comic. So tell me what's your last word on this.
I mean, I just think that people need to do like their own research. It is a huge problem that we have in every facet of life, that press releases get repackaged into actual and passed off as news stories around the country. And, school reform whatever you want to call it, is no different. People need to actually learn what they're talking about. People need to do their own research. They shouldn't even necessarily just listen to me. I mean, like, just because I told you something doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate. I have opinions too, and my opinions, are my own. And obviously I think that they're valid, but you should actually know what we're talking about before you start forming opinions, so you can know that I'm right. Okay. So do your research.
Imagine that.
Figure out, like, do your own research, learn the way these systems work, so that when you speak on them, you can speak educated and you can speak eloquently. You're not just repeating what somebody else wants you to say, because it furthers their own end and protects their livelihood, protects their job, because that's what it is. It's a self-perpetuating system. And that's what it really comes down to.
I appreciate that, Andrew. I appreciate you coming on today. For everybody watching and listening, if you want to catch up with Andrew, his Twitter handle has been going across the bottom. I definitely suggest that you follow Andrew. He's got lots of interesting things to say about issues of the day. And even as you saw here today, from different perspectives, not just all from the political, educational stuff, but through some other venues like sports and popular culture. So I think you should follow Andrew. To Toya and Elaine and Educator Barnes, who is watching this morning, Michelle, Elaine Wells, Christina Laster, all of our homies and our aces who come here every day to make these discussions richer and smarter and blacker in a lot of cases. L. Michelle Johnson, who is all but dissertation before I'm going to start calling her Dr. Johnson. To Joshua Israel Stewart, who has a unique name that sounds familiar to me, but I don't know why it sounds so familiar. Thank you for participating here, son. I appreciate you for always being there in the morning with us. Alan, thank you for your comments today. We didn't get to all the comments. I read them all after shows to help formulate future shows. So I appreciate you all. Anybody wants to get in touch with me, my email address is christopher@activist.com. You can get in touch with Andrew at Andrew Pillow on Twitter. That's where you can find him. Again, this has been another, what I think is interesting show in the morning, the Education is Power broadcast. Please share it with a friend, help us grow the show. And send us any ideas, thoughts, feedback that you have. We appreciate you all. Let's keep talking about it. Let's fight for our kids to have a better education. Thank you all.